I think that's going to be very complicated. I mean, I certainly don't dismiss it as an idea, but it's going to take an awful lot of thought, and you're going to have a team that travels with him. You're also going to have to make sure that the sort of politics of who, isn't with him and who is with him doesn't sort of create a problem.
Now, in just over 24 hours' time, Andy Burnham will be walking through the door of number 10 as Prime Minister. In today's Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak has written about just how strange and surreal those first moments are. His advice, though, is to soak up every second of it. With us now is Baroness Bertin, Gabby Bertin, former Downing Street Press Secretary to David Cameron, who has vivid memories of arriving at number 10. Good morning, Gabby.
Good morning.
Tell us what that first hour is like.
I mean, it's really, really surreal, and I think Rishi Sunak makes a good point. You have just got to soak every moment of it up. I mean, you've got to remember that when we came in, we hadn't been anywhere near Downing Street for many, many years. So possibly David Cameron had been in more recent times to go, for some meetings with sort of officials. But essentially, unless you'd been involved in the last Conservative government, i.e. John Major, you had not put a toe into number 10. So it was like walking into a sort of magical place, really. And I do remember vividly that we were not allowed to go through the front door, obviously, because that was how the Prime Minister was entering. We had to go through this sort of secret link door that links the cabinet office to number 10, and quite honestly it was like going into a sort of a different world, and I'll never forget it. Even the sort of the smell of the place, it was just it was something that stays with you, really.
Andy Burnham's going to have that experience tomorrow. You're right, in a different vein, because this isn't the start of a new party taking over. He takes over from Keir Starmer, of course. How do you prepare an upcoming Prime Minister for that moment?
I just think it's something you almost can't prepare for, if I'm honest. The moment that you take the reins, and of course I was taking the reins as a press secretary for a Prime Minister rather than a press secretary for a leader of the opposition. The levers, suddenly you pull them and something happens, which it is, I'm not trying to make light of it, but, for example, I gave a flippant answer to a journalist sort of about 10 minutes after we came in because the phone was just going bananas. And then it was sort of running on the BBC News for the rest of the day. Your words matter. You take on this enormous responsibility. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that just that entry into number 10 for those first few hours, let's give a bit of a thought for the people leaving, because it's such a human exchange. I remember actually there were huddles of people, because you've got all the officials, of course, who have seen the transition through. You've got some people who are very upset about the people leaving. So I can remember there were sort of huddles of people actually having a tear because it had become so overwhelming. There were also people obviously being so welcoming. I can remember even getting a letter handed to me that the person who did my job before, Stuart Wood, who was a great guy, good friend, he'd written me a note, and it was very it was all quite personal, because you just got to remember that these are real people leaving jobs and real people, taking on enormous responsibility in their new jobs.
It's interesting you said that, you made an offhand comment and suddenly it's leading the news. What are the other sort of potential pitfalls from mistakes that you and your team made that would be advice to Andy Burnham and his team around him to say, right, be aware of X, Y, Z, because these are some traps you could fall into? I
think that you've got to remember that you get swept in as Prime Minister. So he's the principal, and that's absolutely right. And he gets taken off, and everyone wants to have a piece of him, including obviously the officials. Everyone wants to get to know this guy, wants to be close to him. And you, as the team that have got him in there, have to just fight quite hard to remain close. And you also, this is the big tip, again, I don't mean to sound flippant, but it is important, the team that are going in, you need to make sure that you get a desk that is nice and close to his office, because if you're put into sort of outer space, that can sometimes be difficult for your communication with him, because he will be in meetings that you may not get access to. A lot of your sort of contact with the Prime Minister going forward, as someone who was part of his team getting him in, will not necessarily be the same as it was. And so you have to sort of you have to make sure that you are still very much involved in the political decision making as well. And I think that's where sometimes things can go wrong with prime ministers. You lose touch with what you're trying to do, and you need to make sure that you are really constantly remembering, what are we trying to do? What are our responsibilities? What is our absolute sort of sole mission on this, as Rishi Sunak says, short journey? And his is particularly short because he doesn't have much time before the next election.
The other thing that's going to be unique about this Prime Minister is that he's going to split his time between London and Manchester. How much more complicated, actually, is that going to make things?
I think that's going to be very complicated. I mean, I certainly don't dismiss it as an idea, but it's going to take an awful lot of thought, and you're going to have a team that travels with him. You're also going to have to make sure that the sort of politics of who isn't with him and who is with him doesn't sort of create a problem, if I could put it that way. There's also, I think, the other big piece of advice that I would give the team, and it sounds boring, but it's probably that makes or breaks a prime minister, or indeed any leader of any organisation, is the diary management. You have got to think very carefully about all the key events that have to go in the diary, and all the key events that that surround the diary, that in a sense go back to what your mission is about. And so I think people are always a bit sort of sideswept by the fact that there is so much that a prime minister needs to do that is not at his discretion. So the idea that he can just sort of, be away from London, be away from Westminster for long periods of time is potentially going to be quite challenging, because things come up with individuals or with things that you can't predict, that sometimes that could mean that he's zooming around a great deal, and that's not necessarily good for him either. So he'll have to manage that very, very carefully. It's doable, but it's going to be very, very challenging, I think.
Yeah, who actually determines the Prime Minister's diary?
Well, in our day, it was a brilliant colleague of mine called Kate Fall, and she was the Deputy Chief of Staff, and we would have meetings upon meetings upon meetings that went through. We had all the requests, the hundreds of requests. Normally they would be whittled down, to sort of 20 or so, and then we would be going through that weekly, and then there would be a sort of separate meeting as well. So it'd be an enormous big meeting about sort of once every fortnight, and then there will be the weekly, very, very specific diary meetings, and then each day the diary would be gone through to check that was it still fit for purpose for that day, and all the things that were coming up that we hadn't predicted.
So that you can adapt to breaking news. Rishi Sunak says on entering the building you're presented with an hour-by-hour diary for the day and your schedule for the next 3 weeks, which of course has got to be flexible. What would be your advice, Gabby, to anyone who wants to sort of petition the Prime Minister, anyone who has an agenda, who wants to get face-to-face time with him? How do you get yourself in the Prime Minister's diary?
Well, I think that you've got to be a bit realistic, because it is difficult to get into the Prime Minister's diary, and so it should be. But I think that one piece of advice perhaps to the people around him is that, look, you're very powerful now, and you mustn't sort of let that power go to your head. You must always remember to return people's calls, to be courteous, to listen to people. And sometimes it will be a bit like, goodness me, this is backseat driving, or this actually is, a bit of a waste of my time. But still, it matters. And so I think that, that's not quite answering your question. That's about how do you get into the Prime Minister's diary. But I think you have to take a valid reason and a valid issue to the Prime Minister and his team. And if he has a good team, they really should listen to you as well.
It has been so fascinating, Gabby. Thank you very much. Baroness Gabby Bertin, the former Downing Street Press Secretary to David Cameron. Thank you. There's so many different dynamics of the kind of architecture and the infrastructure of what's going to happen tomorrow, and all of the emotions underpinning it, when you've got this huge surge of adrenaline, the weight of responsibility. Rishi Sunak describes it as the awe of the weight of responsibility of what you've been given, and to then work out, right, the business of the job gets on tomorrow, the 20th of July, when Andy Burnham truthfully wanted at least another month to be able to prepare for this moment.
I think this morning, one thing that you absolutely have to do, now that you've heard Gabby Bertin in what was such an insightful conversation there, you have to read Rishi Sunak, and just the two things complement each other so much. When it comes to the diary management, for a start, he makes the point that she was making, you hardly have any time, actually. Loads of the stuff you do is kind of ceremonial, and it might not even necessarily be public facing. So diary management for sure. And crucially tomorrow, this part of Rishi Sunak's column is really sort of going round and round in my head. He was talking about cabinet appointments and how in Downing Street as Prime Minister you maybe have to pick 2 or 3 things that are going to be your absolute determined focus. Then you've got a cabinet that you must appoint and they can carry through other parts of your vision. And so pick the right people. He says, yet I often reflect that 3 of the people who I put round the cabinet table now sit in a different party. As Burnham assembles his team, he should remember that some divides are too big to be bridged. And I think that as Burnham even now is considering who he's going to be appointing to cabinet, there are so many factors at play, but one of them is often used as a, how can I unite the party? I'll take this person from that particular faction and put them there, and that'll keep those people happy. But Sunak's point is, you have to look at it and go, well, is there any point? Is that going to help the cabinet? Is that going to bridge that divide? Or actually, am I just kind of, spitting in the rain on that, and I should make a different decision that's going to better serve me?
He says you need a careful balance. Liz Truss took people who supported her entirely, basically. And if there's too much sort of agreement, actually that can hinder your work. And you don't have those different viewpoints. So you need difference, but not chasms, in
exactly.
opinion.
It's brill. So now that you've heard from Gabby Bertin, read Rishi Sunak with your digital subscription at thetimes.com.